Thank you, Fareed. Well done. Let me pick up on how you opened about identity politics taking over, identity revolution, and connect it with the polls today that are driving us all crazy, that Biden and Trump are essentially tied, and that still mystifies me. And how are you advising the Biden campaign?
Look, they are very good people. They did win the last election. So if you want a more positive spin on where things are, Biden is polling very badly. Democrats are polling badly. I say very badly, but he's, as you described it, he's sort of neck and neck, but he's down in all of the, in 5 of the 6 of the swing states, and in one of them or 2 of them, Trump is even leading beyond the margin of error. So it's, the polling isn't looking great. But when you look at actual elections that have taken place over the last 2 or 3 years, the Democrats have outperformed. They outperformed in the midterms. They've outperformed in state elections. They've outperformed in governor's races. And they've outperformed usually against MAGA Republicans. So, I think that it's fair to say, and this is what allows me to sleep at night, is that there is a kind of working anti-MAGA majority in the United States. Trump has as they famously say, he has a high floor. There are a lot of people who want to vote for him, but he has a low ceiling. He doesn't really, it's very hard for him to get over 47%. So in terms of, what is the nature of public support for him, I'm pretty comfortable saying there is a working anti-MAGA majority. There's a working anti-Trump majority. Here's the problem. We have the only democratic system in the world where that doesn't matter, right? In literally any other democracy in the world, none of us would be having these worries because Joe Biden will win this election by, I would guess, 9 million votes, right? Somewhere between 8 and 9 million votes. Now, you would think that would be enough to get you to be president, but it isn't, because in the United States, we pay more attention to land than to people. And the way the Electoral College is constructed, we have to look at these 5 to 6 states. So within those states, I'll be honest with you, it's a statistical tie. So anyone who tells you they can confidently tell you what's going to happen, you're literally talking about 30,000 votes shifting in 5 states, and it's one way or the other. It won't change the percentages that I was talking about at the top, right? Trump will still not break his 47% ceiling, but all he needs is of the 74 million people who vote for him, he just needs a bunch more to vote in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona and Georgia, and a few, Biden will rack up huge tallies in places like California, New York, Illinois, but that doesn't count. So those are wasted votes. So that's the nature of the problem. Now, why is it all kind of coming down to identity politics? Because as a country, that is where we are. It's not just us. If you look at the Brexit vote, it was the same thing. It was largely a kind of cultural class divide. If you look at what's happening in France, between Macron and Le Pen, even if you look at Latin America, what's interesting is all the elections in Latin America, basically what happens is the anti-elitist, anti-establishment guy wins. Sometimes in Latin America, that's from the left. Sometimes it's from the right. So the AMLO in Mexico is from the left. But this crazy guy in Argentina is from the right. And what they have in common is they say, we are outside of that establishment. I think there was a wonderful book by Berkeley sociologist who called White Working Class, where she talks about what is it that the working class is looking for in somebody. What do they admire, what they not admire? And she said the thing most people don't understand is they don't dislike rich people. They like rich people. They want to be rich themselves. What they really dislike are overeducated urban professionals. In other words, kind of most of us, right? And what they hate about us is we're overeducated, we look down on them, we live a kind of weird, exotic lifestyle. You know, we do yoga and eat kale, right? And they, you know, and remember, in parts of the country, something yoga is, you know, this sounds to them akin like to witchcraft. So I always thought, by the way, when Hillary Clinton, in the defense of having her private server, she once said, you know, I just wanted a place where I could schedule my yoga appointments. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I think more people are going to have problem with the yoga than the private server part. So, you know, there's like this, I think over these last 30 or 40 years that I was describing, we had all these trends that took place. There's another one I didn't mention, which is the rise of a kind of elite technocracy, of an elite meritocracy of people, well-educated, competent, doing very well. And we did fantastically through this period. By fantastically, I just mean our incomes kept pace, our standards of living went up, technology costs went down for us, you know, all these good things happened. But that wasn't the experience of a lot of other people who didn't have college degrees, who didn't live in urban centers, who weren't comfortable with a kind of cosmopolitan, diverse lifestyle. And there's a deep class and cultural resentment that is showing up in the polls. And you can see it in Hungary. Who are the people who vote for Viktor Orban? They're rural, they're less educated, they're more religious. In Turkey, who are the people who vote for Erdogan? Same. In France, who are the people voting for Le Pen? Same. In England, who are the people who voted for Brexit? Same. And in America, who are the people voting for Trump? Same. So that's the dynamic that you can call identity, you can call culture, you can call class, but it's all of them really mixed together.
Fareed, is this on? Okay, thanks. In your presentation, you mentioned declining American influence, like with the Iraq War and then 2008. But in your book, you mention a term called the West Plus. Stronger alliances have emerged among Europe, East Asian democracies, and others after the Russia invaded Ukraine. This sounded hopeful to me. What are your hopes for the West Plus?
So, you know, if you look at it in terms of just raw power, again, the US is doing fine. I mean, I told you that statistic about the Eurozone versus the US in Obama's presidency. So get this, the Eurozone economy in 2008, same size as the US economy. Today, the US economy is twice the size of the Eurozone economy. Here's my favorite statistic to tell you how well the US economy is doing. If Great Britain were to join the United States, Great Britain, the former colonizer of the United States, were to join the United States as the 51st state, it would be the 51st poorest state in the Union. Great Britain's per capita GDP is lower than Mississippi today, which is, by the way, the poorest state in the Union. You can Google this and check. It is extraordinary how well we have done compared to other countries. And we have this alliance of countries, Europe, Japan, Australia, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, you know, on good days, India. You know, India plays a little bit of both sides. But if you think of the West Plus, meaning, you know, the West and countries that broadly share some of those values, it's about 65% of global GDP. The problem is, it's not a single country. And it's in a world that has become much more multipolar, right? So you think about an India, you think about a Turkey, you think about a Brazil or an Indonesia. These countries are now much more active, uppity, obstreperous, call it what you will. They're not going to take directions from Washington. They're not going to take directions from anyone, by the way. So how do you corral this group and say to them, look, these are important values. Look at, you know, and I give Biden enormous credit, but look at the effort it has taken to put together a coalition to oppose Russia's annexation of Ukraine, right? This is hard work, and you have to make compromises, and you have to make sacrifices, and you have to cut people's special deals, like the Indians who said, you know, well, whatever happens, we're going to keep buying cheap Russian oil. And so you have to say, okay, we're not going to beat you up about that, but can you help us on these other things? So it's a much more difficult, complicated challenge. It's a world in which no one has the kind of influence they used to have, because it's a world that is genuinely bottom-up, genuinely more democratic, with many of these countries doing much better economically than they've done before, like the Indias and the Brazils and the Indonesias. And so it takes an enormous amount of sophistication and commitment to manage that process. And, I don't have to tell you my views on Biden versus Trump on that, but it's obvious, right? I mean, Trump, first of all, thinks all these countries are losers. He thinks that, he has profound distaste for the idea of America being engaged in the world. And the reality is this is all happening at a time where it's actually not only incredibly important that we be engaged in the world, but it is a very difficult task because everything has to be done through this complicated set of coalitions. You have to find a way. Look at what Biden was able to do when Israel was attacked by Iran. Right? He got the Europeans, he got the French, the British, the Jordanians, the UAE, even the Saudis secretly, to all join together in a collective defense so that of the 300 missiles that Iran launched against Israel, 99.5% of them were intercepted. Literally, almost all of them were intercepted in a collective effort. By the way, that one day's defense cost $1 billion, most of which paid for by the United States. But I say, what we don't understand, what people like Trump don't understand is that is what is creating a stable, peaceful, prosperous world that allows all the rise of that I was talking about, all the prosperity that America has, all the extraordinary advances we take. That's the bedrock. If you go back to a world like World War II or World War I or something like that, that's a whole different world. And it's easy to take for granted all the hard work that goes into keeping that system stable. It's nobody sings kind of hymns to stability, but it's kind of the basis on which civilization rests.
Let's talk about World War I and World War II, because in your book, you bring out some lessons learned, and it relates to what you're calling new politics, where open and closed nations might be a more useful way of thinking versus right and left. So what were the preconditions of World War I and World War II, and what is the lesson for the future?
So look, there are many, many lessons one can draw from those, but there's one thing that struck me about the run-up to both of those wars, is that in both of those cases, what happens for the preceding 10 years is a kind of big backlash against openness, against liberalism, against diversity. People aren't adequately aware, but for example, in the 20s, there was an enormous migration of Jews from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, places like that, to Germany. Very, very large numbers. I mean, the number of Jews in Germany, I think, triples in about a 20-year period. Much of this is a consequence of the First World War, and it's a consequence of opening up. And in those days, Germany was a civilized, rich country, and a lot of Jews faced pogroms in places like Russia and Eastern Europe, Ukraine and Poland, and so they started moving east. So, and that, in some ways, helps explain why the backlash took the form it did, right? Similarly, in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century, you had a huge amount of immigration. Think about the US, where in the 1890s and 1900s, you have huge rises in immigration. And of course, remember the backlash. 1924 in America, you put in place quotas, which basically say nobody who doesn't come from Western Europe. In fact, it was even Northwestern Europe. Even the Italians were regarded as suspicious in those days. So they run up to these periods, these wars, has always been a politics of nationalism, protectionism, monoculturalism, of a kind of saying we want to conserve, we want to protect our own, we want to keep out people. And it's a very dangerous mentality. And that's one thing I worry that's happening on both the right and the left in America. There is a certain amount of kind of, whether it's towards, and by the way, I believe we should be tough on the Chinese, but there's a certain amount of it which has a racial tinge or a xenophobic tinge. There's some of this protectionism that seems to me to be, designed to sort of cut us off from the world. And we're forgetting we have been the principal beneficiaries of a big, open, diverse world. We're the ones who, as I sometimes say to some friends of mine in the Biden administration who want to put more of these controls on, I say, if we got it all wrong for the last 30 years, who would you have traded places with? Right? What country did better than we did? I mean, are you looking at France enviously these days? Are you looking at Germany enviously? We've done the best of anyone. Has it been perfect? No. Could we have done more to redistribute? Yes. I mean, I think very strongly. We've been very, but that's an old American story. We're very, we're uncharitable to people who are very low down on the scale in the United States. But that's not a reason to close things up. That's a reason to, to renew the child tax care, the child care tax credit. That's the reason to expand food stamps, and not sit there trying to make sure that, we seem to live in fear that one person somewhere in America is getting more food stamp money than he should get. And, we designed the system so it's so punitive and harsh, and these people have to jump through so many hoops because someone somewhere is gaming the system. Meanwhile, I don't have to tell you how many people on Wall Street are gaming the system and how many people in the, ONG business. I mean, there's a lot of gaming of the system, but we care that, God forbid, somebody should get food stamps who doesn't deserve them. That's the problem. You don't need to, you can keep a very open system and be a little more generous.
My favorite chapter in your book touched on a point you brought up in the lecture about this hyper rate of change itself. It is a core cause of backlash and fear. I myself am perplexed by my computer. It's just so frustrating. What is your advice to young people, and all of us for that matter, to adapt to this future of hyper change?
Look, it's very hard because there's no question it's faster than at any previous point in history. You just have to look at the data. As I was saying to you, think about the number of countries that have entered the global economy in the last 30 years, right? If you looked at the expansion of the global economy in the 50s, you would have said, oh yeah, Japan came online, and then maybe South Korea came online. So that's like 100 million people. And I'm telling you, 2.5 billion people. And by the way, that's not even counting Latin America and all. If you put it all together, it's like 3 billion people in a 10-year period joined the global economy. If you look at the transformation of what the information technology, as you're suggesting, Grandel, it's just, and you can see it in the numbers. The first 100 million people to use Google, I think it took 10 years. The first 100 million people to use ChatGPT was, I think, in 3 weeks. Right? So it's like we're just seeing a kind of crazy acceleration of change. I wish I could tell you that I had some Yoda-like advice on this. Look, I think the most important thing you can do is to not back away from it in fear. Don't lean away from this stuff. Lean into it. It's not that hard. Don't get bamboozled by fancy names and things like that. Find somebody who can explain it to you. Find people, this stuff is not so overwhelming that try it out. Use ChatGPT. Don't tell yourself, oh my God, I don't know what this is. It's very simple. And by the way, when you use it, you will discover it has its real limitations. Let me give you an example just to demystify. So in writing this book, at one point, I was, and I tried to use it. It was honestly not very helpful, but I tried to use it, and I asked it at one point. I said, give me the name. This never made it in the book, but I had a thought that I was in the conclusion going to talk about all the great controversial liberals and all the super controversial positions, which turned out to be right over time. So I was going to pick Eleanor Roosevelt, who was, the most controversial political figure in the United States in the 30s and 40s. So controversial, her husband couldn't formally endorse a lot of her views. But if you think about everything she stood for, universal rights of man, equality for Jews and the Gentiles, for blacks and whites, better working conditions for children, women being allowed to go to law schools and college. Every one of them is now conventional wisdom. Like, you can't imagine somebody oppose that, but there were people opposing every single one of those things that she did. And so I said to ChatGPT, give me a quote from one of the most prominent opponents of Eleanor Roosevelt's policies. And ChatGPT, immediately, those of you who's used it, it's sometimes in error but never in doubt. It says, sure, Senator Thomas Beebe of Missouri, and here's the quote. Well, there was a Senator Thomas in Missouri, the Senator Thomas Beebe. He was an opponent of Eleanor Roosevelt. The quote is completely manufactured. So I then go back and ask it, okay, and I try out 3 or 4 other periods in history where I say, every time it's the same thing, except one time it actually made up a name, and one time it gave me, for FDR, it gave me the name of Harold Ickes. For those of you who remember, Ickes was FDR's Secretary of the Interior, highly unlikely to be a great critic of his boss. So I call up a couple of people who know these systems well, and I said, what's going on? And they said, the best answer I got was, you have to understand, this is not a bug, this is a feature of Chat. What is ChatGPT? It is a language, LLM, these are large language models, which effectively take whatever they have, they sweep through everything they've read, and they predict what is the next most likely word that I should be saying. So what it was, on the basis of everything it was saying, this is the most likely quote that somebody like Thomas Beebe would have had about Eleanor Roosevelt's policies. And it was basically true. That was a reasonably good hallucination or imagination of what Thomas Beebe, but it wasn't an actual factual quote. And so what I realized is these are not yet information retrieval models. They are language generation models. That's why they're so good when you ask it to do something like this. Can you write a toast for me for my cousin's birthday in the style of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven? Right? Because now you're saying to it, hallucinate, imagine, come up with stuff. And when but when you ask it something that is more focused and specific, I have always found, and the reason I find it not very useful, it's sort of giving you a college freshman's bullshit essay that, has some kind of you're kind of impressed that they covered most of the points, but it's a little thin and it's a little, vague, and that's what I mean. So don't, at the end of the day, we can always unplug the machine. The people who think the AI is going to take over the world and destroy human civilization, I just have one comment, which is the off switch, right? They don't have an off switch on us. We have an off switch on them.
Fareed, you wrote a book on liberal education. And it seems to me that a liberal humanities education helps us develop tools to navigate these more intense emotionalities in this future of hyper change. Right?
Yeah, I would actually even say it becomes more important in an age of AI because, look, at the end of the day, for all that I was saying, AI is in its early stages. It's obviously going to get better, and they'll find ways to connect, the search engine to the AI system, and so it'll be able to give me the right quote. It's going to be better at us than at simple analysis, right? I mean, think about a doctor diagnosis. Well, what is diagnosis? It's pattern recognition. So you go to a good doctor because he has a good memory, he has a good understanding of medicine. He's read a whole bunch of articles. He's treated hundreds of patients. And maybe he can remember, 200 of those articles that he's read and the research in them. Well, the computer is going to look at every single case in human history of the particular problem you have and be able to give you a diagnosis on the, how can you, we won't be able to do better than that, right? What can we do better? We can do one thing that AI cannot do, which is relate to other human beings, right? So imagine the doctor now, okay, he gets the diagnosis from the machine, but now he's got to explain it to the patient. He's going to make the patient understand why this is important. He has to translate that into a regimen, a regime of pills, of exercise, of surgery, or whatever. He has to make sure the patient keeps on it, stays on it. Those qualities of being a life coach become much more important than the simple mechanical task of pattern recognition, of looking at these cells and saying, well, if you look at 47 million X-rays, these are the closest matches. Yeah, no doctor will be able to do that better than the machine. But no machine will be able to do all the things I just described. So there are already a bunch of AI fiction books on Amazon, and they don't sell at all. And the reason is, we human beings are interested in other human beings. We're interested in the creative thought process, in what's going on of other human beings. We're not interested in what, your iPad produced, right? So that's going to be our great skill. It's our social skills, our emotional skills, our empathy, our ability to lead people in teams. And these are all, I don't want to say they're softer skills, but they're skills where the humanities, where an understand, I think we should be getting our doctors to read more fiction. That when I was on the board at Yale, a surgeon took me on one of the most fascinating things we did was he took us on a tour of the Yale Art Gallery. And this guy used to have all his students take this class where he would take them through art and literature, and he would ask them to observe. And he would say, look at the painting and tell me what you see. And they would write down things, and he would say, you're not looking closely enough. You're not looking at the pain in that woman's eyes. You're not looking. He would have them read, and he would say, what do you get from this story? And he'd want to see if they connected with the characters, with the human beings. That kind of stuff, seems to me, is going to become more important in a world where doing the quadratic equation is something any routine AI machine can do. So how do you get people to understand that? Now, the core of this, though, is you have to not be scared of the machine. You have to be willing to use the machine. You have to be willing to embrace that stuff. Your job will not be taken away by AI, but it might be taken away by another human being who knows how to use AI and combine it with his human skills in an effective combination.
Fareed, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Your book aptly says human nature needs stabilizing traditions because of the problem of backlash. While we make change, we need to conserve to limit the backlash. Is there a country or a group or a city you think is doing this right?
So this is this is the part I end the book with, which is a kind of philosophical meditation about why is it that we need that sense of certainty in our lives, Throughout history, when we've had a great deal of change and disruption, what happens is people long for the certainty they have lost. And the certainty that has dominantly come from religion, from tradition, to a certain extent from nationalism, a sense that's, in a sense, the great advance of Enlightenment liberalism has been to say, hey, you, the individual, are king. You don't need to listen to any religious authority or any secular authority as to what the purpose of your life is. You figure that out. That was what Jefferson meant when he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's your personal decision, what your pursuit of happiness is going to be. But it turns out, when you put it that way to people and you actually give it to them and throw them in the, it causes huge anxiety. What is my, and it turns out a lot of people would rather just say, well, whatever the Bible says, whatever the Talmud says, whatever the Quran says, right? And that feeling of what Pascal called the infinite abyss, the hole in your heart that is left by that sense of certainty, that those rituals, that it produces an enormous sense of anxiety. And people have tried in various ways. Is there something you can do to give people that sense? But it's very hard, because there's nothing that can compare with the idea that you exist on this earth only to serve the glory of God. If you do it right, you will go to heaven and have an immortal life everlasting. If you don't, you will burn in the hellfires of damnation forever. I mean, that's pretty powerful stuff, right? And it's not an accident that you look around the world and the greatest cathedrals and the greatest symphonies and the greatest temples are built in awe and fear of this reality. What we provide, in a sense, as modern liberals, instead, is we say, you can have a good, comfortable life. You don't have anybody telling you what to do. You don't, it lacks that sort of majesty. It lacks that ultimate sense of meaning. It happens to be true. It happens to be a better way for societies to live, because, in order to do all that, you had to wage wars and inquisitions and burn people at the stake and all that kind of thing. But there's an emptiness that people feel. You can't get around that. Every immigrant knows this instinctively, which is, you take older people out of the old country and they want to come here because they want to make more money, and then they feel there's some emptiness. They feel some sense of a loss, and they miss the old ways. The one thing I think that does help enormously is a sense of community. Because at the end of the day, while you can have all those abstract thoughts, but the truth is, what you live day to day is in a community with people. And if you have those people in your lives, real friends, family, and you build something meaningful out of that, it's enormously satisfying. And it's real. In a way that all this other stuff is abstractions. So the places that have managed, I think, better than any places to navigate this kind of change are places that have real communities, real, a real bond that has existed. So one of the things that worries me most about America is, what the Surgeon General calls the crisis of loneliness. And a lot of that is technology, but a lot of it is us. I think that many of us, we're sometimes too aspirate. We're always on the go. We're always trying to make the next connection. And sometimes we forget, the neighbor next door, spending 2 hours with her, it might actually be more deeply fulfilling than finding the next perfect, best, contact, conference, whatever it is you're chasing. You sometimes forget that what's there, right there in your life, could be. Warren Buffett had this thing I saw in his last Berkshire meeting, where he said, he always gives these great bits of advice, and somebody asked him, "What do you think? You're getting, I think, 100 years old now," and he said, "Well, I've been thinking about." Who would you want to meet on the last day of your life? Who would you want to meet? And if that's the person you want to meet, why not meet that person right away? Why are you waiting till the last day of your life? And I thought to myself, so my variation on that would be, if I think about that question, the people I'd want to hang out with on the last day of my life are my 3 kids, my closest friends, bizarrely probably my ex-wife, And you know, I don't have to wait till the end of my, I mean, I could be spending more time with all those people today, right? So why not do that? And you will actually build between now and the time you die a richer life for yourself. And so, I mean, that's my small answer to the problem.
Fareed, we want to hang out with you. We want you to come back to Houston. I think we should end there. Thank you for a beautiful evening. I have a gift for you. It's a clock engraved with your name because we progressives like to say, it is our time. Thank you so much for a beautiful evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.